Hi, my name is Felix Matos Rodriguez and I am the Chancellor of the City University of New York. People who know me call me Felo, and this is my new conversation space on CUNY TV, Café con Felo. Bienvenidos a Café con Felo. With us in studio today, a true champion of educational equity and social innovation, the CEO of Robinhood, our city's top, largest anti-poverty organization, Richard Bury. A first-generation Panamanian American, born and raised in the East New York neighborhood of Brooklyn, Richard Bury has spent his career fighting to advance equal opportunities for families and communities often left behind. Richard graduated from Stuyvesant High School at just 16 years old, then attended Harvard and earned a law degree from Yale. Shortly after, he brought his skills home to New York City to put them to work. He also served in the de Blasio administration as deputy mayor for strategic policy initiatives and was the key architect of the city's Pre-K for All initiative. He launched Schools Out, NYC, that offered free after-school programs to all middle school students and led the city's efforts to recruit 1,000 men of color to become public school teachers. Richard also launched the mental health reform initiative called Thrive NYC and managed the city's relationship with the 250,000 students in our beloved CUNY system. In fact, he says the success of every CUNY graduate translates to victory for New York City. So Rick, thank you so much for being with us today. We always begin the question in Café con Felo about your coffee habits. Are you a coffee drinker, and how do you take it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Chancellor. It's great to be here. I am a big coffee drinker, probably too much of a coffee drinker. My typical order is a cold brew with a shot of espresso and oat milk, but sometimes I'll mix it up with a little mocha if I'm feeling like a little sugar in my system.
That is part of my ritual too in the morning, my coffee in the morning, and then a few more to sort of keep me going through the day. I think it's important to begin with letting our viewers get a little bit of your sort of personal and professional journey. We mentioned a few things in the intro, but you've had a very interesting career, education, nonprofits, government, and now in this role in philanthropy. Can you give us a sense of some of the key markers and how you think that it all shapes into the story that allows you to be the perfect person to be leading Robinhood at this time?
Well, sure. I mean, I know from the perfect person. I'm definitely the happy person to be leading Robinhood at this time. You know, it's hard to look back at your career because it's not like there was a plan or a pathway that I was trying to follow. But, you know, what I will say that the theme and the through line that go through my career is really just trying to make sure that more New York City kids had the kind of opportunities that I did. There were a few things for me that were very important. You talked about being the child of Panamanian immigrants. You know, my parents both immigrated from Panama in the 60s. And my mom was a public school teacher. She taught high school at East New York High School for Trinidad Tech for about 37 years. She taught Spanish and ESL. And so part of my journey is just really following her and seeing how she spent her life dedicated to helping young people in Brooklyn, many of whom were immigrants from places like Puerto Rico and the DR who were coming to New York, and for whom she was really a lifeline, helping them to learn English and connect to the city. So certainly my parents are part of that. My dad was also very active in our church and our community, so certainly having them as role models. But really for me also just growing up in East New York, Brooklyn, which, you know, as you know, it's a challenging neighborhood. It was definitely challenging in the 70s and 80s when I grew up. But I was really lucky. I had great educational experiences, but one thing that became very clear to me early, especially going to Stuyvesant, is that I and my Stuyvesant classmates were on an educational trajectory that was nothing like that from most of the kids who I grew up with in East New York. And so I think those things, I think the inspiration that comes from having parents who, for whom service is a critical value, but also sort of experiencing what happens when the world decides that some kids are worth helping, some kids have a future, but some kids aren't worth supporting. The combination of the inspiration and also the anger that comes from seeing that, I think set me on my path. As you said, I went to law school but never really planned to be a lawyer. I've always wanted to work with children, work with youth development, work in education, and have just been lucky. I've been able to find these opportunities to, I think, do good work in the city that I love. and it's gotten me here to Robinhood.
That's great. And I think a perfect segue into, I want to make sure that our viewers have a sense of the history of the Robin Hood Foundation.
Sure.
I don't think that many people may be familiar with the work, even though the impact in New York is really, really fantastic. And I heard some rumors about how it get the idea in a Chinese restaurant. I don't know if that's a real story or not, but I figure since I have you here, we can get the real history and a sense also what are the key priorities now that it's under your leadership.
Yeah, sure. So, Robinhood was founded in 1988 by Paul Tudor Jones and a few other hedge fund managers in New York, and really came up after the crisis of '88. And these were folks who had so much financial success in New York City. They're at the top of their game, and they felt like they owed so much to New York City, but they saw a city that was suffering. And the story goes that they got together. Paul got them friends together over Chinese takeout and said, "Well, what can we do?" And 35 years later, we, in a given typical year, we invest worth of $125, $150 million in some of the highest impact organizations in the fight against poverty and the fight for economic opportunity in New York, of which, as you know, CUNY is probably our biggest and certainly our
Thank you
most
for the
impactful
historic support and your support too.
Yeah, and so, but that's really where it came from. But there was this idea that we in New York City could do better. And Robinhood operates with a couple of key ideas in mind. First and foremost, the mission is to end poverty in New York. And what that means for us is really helping people to escape poverty permanently. Yeah. One of the things that we know from our work, that you know from your work, is that oftentimes poverty can be a revolving door. People can get a step ahead, they can get that good job, but it just takes one crisis, one missed paycheck, or an unexpected medical bill, or a parent who needs help. One thing can topple that well-earned financial sustainability. It keeps young people from finishing their higher education career. That keeps people from really getting on that pathway to opportunity. So we really want to invest in initiatives going to set people permanently on the path of poverty. So we know that we're not just giving them a brief respite, we're putting them on the path to economic independence. A second thing that really drives our work is a recognition that philanthropy can't do this alone, and that to really be effective in changing the lives of people in New York, it takes philanthropy and government and nonprofits and higher education and community groups and activists all working together. And so we're trying to invest in things that we know are going to have an impact, but we're also trying to make sure that if they're having an impact, that people know about it, that government knows about it, that we can take things and bring them to scale and make sure they have the support in the community to be sustainable. And the last thing is just around impact. We want to do things that we know will actually have an impact. And so often in our work, we can be satisfied with trying our best and, worked really hard. We tried our best. But that's not enough. People who are living in poverty, people who are vulnerable, people who are in school and are trying to learn, people who are trying to get a good job, they need more than best efforts. They need interventions that work. They need that job training program that's actually going to get them a job where they can pay their rent and put food on the table and think about their futures. They need that school that's actually going to teach them to read. They need that food program that is actually going to help them not only feed themselves today, but make sure they have access to the resources that will make sure their family is well fed tomorrow. And so we are really maniacal about trying to identify interventions that work. Some of that is from the DNA of our founders. They were business guys, so they thought about business. But for me, it's not about that. It's not about appealing to the business community. It's about having respect for the people of New York who deserve governments and institutions that actually work for them and that are actually succeeding in making this city the beacon of opportunity that we can be, that we sometimes are, but really can be for everyone.
No, I mean, that's been part of that profound sense of accountability to making sure that this is effective, and also know that there's many things out there that could be funded, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to if you're going to invest those dollars, you want to make sure that it's making a difference, it can go to scale, and that you're getting the right metrics so that you can measure that impact, and then also impact some other things too. And
exactly right.
We've been very fortunate, and at CUNY, I'm chancellor now. I was president of 2 campuses, so I was worked closely with the foundation. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of, from your perspective, perspective of the CUNY Robin Hood journey. I mean, ASAP comes to mind as one of the key things that without Robin Hood's intervention, we would have never been able to sort of get it off the ground and test it and get good data and show that it works, and now scale it up to have, 25,000 students, right? About 40% of all our community college students benefit from ASAP. There's so many things that I can talk about, but from your perspective, what are some of the key ones that you're most proud of, and maybe some of the things you're looking forward to?
Well, CUNY ASAP is definitely one of them. But just to step back, we talked about we're all in the business of investing in things that work. Part of it is about investing in institutions that have a track record of success. And so CUNY always makes sense as a partner. And if we have an idea, CUNY is always going to come to mind because CUNY has a track record of success. That doesn't mean everything works. We're also in the business of innovation. And if we knew how to do everything, we'd be doing everything, right? And so oftentimes the collaboration between Robinhood and CUNY, if we're investing in CUNY, CUNY may have an idea. We don't know that it's going to work, but there's a reason to believe that it might work. And so part of it has to do with our trust in CUNY as a partner that shares our values, that is committed to creating opportunity, that is committed to accountability, and that we know is going to work with us and be transparent and is going to try its best. And if the thing doesn't work, it's going to be transparent about that too, so we can go ahead and take those dollars and put them somewhere that works. So a lot of it has to do with the way CUNY approaches this work, but some of it just has to do with what CUNY represents. You've heard me say this before, but I say it everywhere and all the time, not just because I'm on Cafe con Fellow, but I don't think there is any institution in this city that is important for the future of opportunity as CUNY is. And so many universities around the country, for different reasons, are oftentimes they're not really delivering on their promise in many ways. But what CUNY actually does is it helps people advance in their lives. And your campuses are always on the top of the list of campuses that are actually
social mobility,
creating opportunity, not just taking privileged kids and keeping them privileged, or taking kids that don't have privilege and not actually training them for a future. And so those are the reasons why we love partnering with CUNY. And you mentioned some of the great ideas. CUNY ASAP, one of the things, again, people ask me what am I proud of, I always talk about CUNY ASAP. Again, an idea, looking at a problem. Why are the community college graduation rates, 3-year graduation rates, so low, hovering about 20% at the time, I believe, and thinking of what can we do about that. CUNY coming up with an idea, coming to funders like Robinhood, who invest in the idea, again, because the idea makes sense and because we trust in CUNY as a partner. It works. We invest in research. MDRC does an evaluation. It proves that it works. Doubling, you don't see interventions that double outcomes. Right?
In such short time. Yep.
Doubling outcomes in a tremendously short time at a pretty low cost given the benefit you get. And then coming to the de Blasio administration, of which the time I was just entering, and having an opportunity to take this program that I think was probably serving 4,000 students at the time, and now with public dollars serving 25. And now Robinhood doesn't have to fund it because the public funds it. There's CUNY ACE, which is the version of CUNY ASAP for the four-year colleges. Yep. There's CITE, which is helping to make sure that New York City's teaching force is computationally literate, so they can bring those skills, but that investing in career path, the degree mapping program, which I think is so exciting and so common sense, like making sure that students understand how their interests and their degrees and their coursework is actually mapped to careers. And then helping them connect the internships and what do you need to get there, the relationships, the paid internships, the exposure, the mentorship, the relationships that are going to help you get that first job and that second job. And so, you can go across the board, right? There's a million things that we do. And what I'm proud of really is the idea to get to partner with you and your amazing colleagues and campuses across the city, get to do some experimenting together. The thing about a place like Robinhood, if you guys do the work, we get to come along for the ride, but help to bring resources and our experience and hopefully adding value that these programs
But let me add a caveat there. Totally in agreement, but one of the things in being a trusted partner too is that you've also gotten to know us very well.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like at times, it's not just coming with the paycheck, right? Or with the funds. It's coming with, we've worked with you before. And on this one, you guys need to push the envelope a little bit more here. And this is one area where you need to improve. And when you hear that from a trusted partner, that you know that is coming from sharing values, sharing mission, you accept that feedback in a different way. That if it's a fund that doesn't know, has not invested in you and really doesn't understand. So an added element of why I know we love working with Robinhood is because in that partnership we've gotten to know each other well, and there's many things in which you have pushed us to do better, and we value that. So I want to acknowledge that.
Well, thank you for saying that. We appreciate it. But it goes both ways, because when you have some of the outsized wins that some of these programs have had, it also helps show us that we can do more. We can push other partners to do more, because we know that transformational change is possible. And what is more transformational than helping a New York City student get that 2-year, that 4-year degree, making sure that they're getting the degree which is actually tied into the skills they need to succeed.
And jobs that are out there
and
for
the
them.
jobs that are out there here in New York City, building our economy, making our city stronger, making our city more equitable, making a city that works for everyone. So it's mutual. I'm glad to hear that we can help push you, but you also push us.
So perfect segue. We have about 4 minutes. I want to talk about the Poverty Tracker report. It's something Robinhood has been doing with Columbia University, I believe, for many, many years. I think it's a very important report, and it came out recently, and I want to sort of first give an audience a sense of what the report normally covers, and what are some of the key findings, and why it's so important at this moment in New York City's history.
It's a sobering report. Briefly, the Poverty Tracker, I think we're in our 12th year of our partnership with Columbia, and essentially what we're doing is we're interviewing a group of New Yorkers, and we track them and follow them over time. So we're talking to them every few months over the course of the years to understand what is their experience here in New York like. And we use it to really help us paint a picture about where people's needs are and to help us understand where should we be investing. The last report was sobering. What it showed that in New York City, the amount of people living in poverty grew from 1.5 million New Yorkers to 2 million New Yorkers. 2 million New Yorkers living in poverty. That is a devastating number, and part of what it reflects is the experience post-pandemic, where during the pandemic, the federal government, the state government, the city government really stood up for Americans and New Yorkers in need and made a series of investments that helped stabilize people's lives, the expansion of the child tax credit being a prime example. But even though we now know from a policy perspective that these things can help
and they were effective.
People, they were effective, they were temporary, and we have not had the political will to sustain them. And we're seeing that in the poverty numbers. And the other number that I will say that I think is relevant, if you go from 100% of the poverty line to 200%, so double the poverty rate, that represents more than half of all New Yorkers. 56% of New Yorkers live within 200% of the poverty line. And what's alarming about that is that the people who live on the south side of that 200% of the poverty line are twice as likely to experience material hardship as those above 200%, which means that they have trouble, they don't know if they're going to have enough food to put on the table by the end of the month. They're choosing between paying the light bill and the phone bill. They're not sure if they can pay their rent. They didn't go to the doctor maybe because they didn't know if they could pay the bill. More than half New Yorkers are living on that thin an edge. For a family of 4, that's about $88,000 a year. So again, we talk about these issues. We're not talking about a small niche challenges. When we talk about affordability, we're talking about most New Yorkers. And again, it's why this partnership's so important, why CUNY is so important. Because you're one of the few organizations that is really helping the people in that 56% move to a different stage of life.
Well, and it's important that you do the research, and it's impactful when you hear from you, been working in this area for so many years, to have a report like that and call it sobering, right? In terms of the outcomes, and clearly some of it has to do with recovering still from the pandemic, but I think also about policy choices that we need to make, and in the same line of work, trying to make those things different for our next generation of New Yorkers, so people can have access to the report.
Yeah, please go to robinhood.org. It's right on the homepage. You can download the report. It's very readable, it's very accessible, it's very important. And as I said, it's really a devastating report, but let me say that actually there's good news in the report, because what the report shows is that increase in poverty didn't have to happen, because before those numbers in the pandemic, we also had historic reductions in poverty in New York, including historic reductions in child poverty, because governments decided to do things to help people in need. We could do that in 2021. We can do that in 2024.
So I like it. So there's both hope and but also hard data and true stories of individuals. So speaking of individuals, we're going to take a break. And when we return, we're going to have some individuals, some phenomenal CUNY students who are going to come and ask you a few questions. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Café con Felo. Today, I'm joined by Richard Bury, the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of our nation's leading anti-poverty organizations. In this segment of the program, we let our students ask questions, so we went to the students who participate in the CUNY ASAP program, also known as the Accelerated Study in Associate Programs. CUNY's ASAP programs helps eliminate the systemic barriers and personal responsibilities that often prevent many students from completing their degrees. So let's hear from them. The first question comes from Danielle.
With your public service and government background, how do you think CUNY can work more effectively with local and state governments to secure additional resources and support for students?
Perfect question in budget season.
Yeah, but to say that's a great question. Well, look, I think CUNY does very well. You're an effective spokesperson for CUNY. So I think like CUNY, you have an easy sales job in that you got a good product. Some people are out here selling things that nobody should be buying. You got a good sales product. The challenge, of course, is how do you compete in a time where there's so much need and where there's competition for resources to make sure that CUNY's needs are heard. And I think the biggest asset you have is the students. There is no district in this city that doesn't have thousands of CUNY students and CUNY graduates and people who understand what CUNY means. I think the challenge is how do you organize that power, organize those voices so that the people writing the checks in Albany and City Hall can't help but hear them.
Yep. Well, and you mentioned something that I often say to our folks too, is that we also have to know that some of the other programs that need funding will have an impact on the outcome of those students too, right? So we need to be mindful of that thing too. So thank you for that. I think we have a question now from Christopher.
Given your work with initiatives like Thrive NYC, how do you envision integrating mental health support into CUNY's success and opportunity programs to serve students better?
Access to mental health services is a challenge.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thrive NYC was really an effort to have New York City be on the forefront of expanding access to mental health services. And there are a bunch of principles that really underlie Thrive, but I'll name two. One is stigma and one is access. So stigma is really about making sure that we reduce the barriers to people seeking support. One of the things about the experience during the pandemic, of course, is that I hate to say there's ever a silver lining to the pandemic, but I will say that one thing that I do think the pandemic has helped is that it's unleashed conversations about mental health, because every household in America, people understand, they see it with their children, the ways in which the experience of the pandemic, the isolation, the fear, how it has continued to affect so many of us. So part of it is around stigma. We need to have a conversation, an expanded conversation around mental health, so that people aren't afraid to ask for help. And that is critical. And that's not just about happy talk. There are systems and programs and interventions and institutions like CUNY can do to help facilitate those conversations. But those have to be tied to access. Mm-hmm. There have to be services that are available. They have to be culturally competent. They have to be accessible. And by accessible, I mean, you can be available and not be accessible. By that I mean, if you have to call in for a referral, but it takes a while to get a call back and you can't get an appointment and it's 20 blocks away and there's a big sign on the door that says mental health services and you're still struggling with the stigma, even when it's there, you might not go, and the problem is too many of the time it's not even there. So we really have to invest, and some of that takes resources, but some of it's about having better connections. Some of the best things we did in the public schools in New York is just bring more mental health services inside the building, and and not in a separate space. Put it in the health clinic. Put it, put it in the counselor's office, so that people are just more accustomed to it and it's easier to get to. So I think CUNY has a great opportunity. Like a lot of things, that it takes resources. But I think even with limited resources, there are things that a place like CUNY can do to help with access and to help reduce stigma.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And our last question comes from Crystal.
Given your work with iMentor and other mentoring programs, how do you think mentorship can complement the support provided by CUNY ASAP and other programs to help students navigate challenges and achieve their academic and career goals?
You were the co-founder of iMentor, a phenomenal organization, and we're very proud to partner with them. So great question.
Yeah, great question. Look, so iMentor is a national organization that matches high school students and college students with mentors to help them go to and through college. And it's just, it's common sense in any profession, any career. We were just talking about it. Mentorship matters.
Yep.
And especially in the world, we think about the high schools where there is such a gap between the amount of college counselors and the amount of students. And then, and so getting the advice and support you need, and mentoring can be an incredible way to give everybody that one-on-one college counselor. And then when you're in school and when you're in college and you're navigating all the academic and social and talk about mental health challenges, having that person who you know is your champion, who is there for you, and you don't have to be an expert about navigating college. You got to be a caring person who's been through it before, and can be an ear for you to talk to, somebody to help solve problems. So I think mentoring is critical. I know you do too. And again, places like CUNY can really build systems to make sure that all of its students have access to a caring adult who can help them navigate these challenges. And so it's, I know it's a big part of a lot of the programs you do, some of the programs that we're supporting.
Exactly, they have that mentoring component in which the students help other students and they get paid for it. It's a win-win for everybody.
My career wouldn't be where it was without the mentors in my life. I'm sure I'm sure everybody listening could say the same, yeah.
And I know that in iMentor, a majority of the students they serve in New York are CUNY students,
course, yeah.
Or students that are in high school that are going to end up coming to CUNY, and we both have children, and we also know how irritating it can be that your kids listen to the advice from other adults in their lives, but not the parent, right? So that's another reason why those mentors mattered. You want to get them in the right track.
I tell my kid all the time, your mother and I, we know a little something. We've done a couple of things, but
It doesn't work for somebody else. But again, ran out of time. We could do 3 programs with you, and it's great to have such a great New Yorker and a good friend and a good supporter of the work that we do at CUNY and a thought partner. So thank you for all you do and continued success in your role.
You are the best. Best news in New York City to have you in this seat. Can't imagine a better person leading a more important place.
Thank you so much, Rich. As we conclude this enlightening conversation, I am reminded of the profound impact of dedicated individuals in shaping a more equitable society. So, Rich, thank you so much for all your uplifting work in New York and for taking the time of joining us here today. And to our audience, thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to join us for Café con Felo on weekends, airing on CUNY TV at 8 p.m. on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Nos vemos. Saludos.